Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to another video. Today, just 4 days out from Election Day, I'm recording this on November 1st, 2024, I'm going to be making my second to last 2024 presidential prediction between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. This race, I apologize for not making an update on it since Labor Day. Well, I guess I did make a community post on it just a couple of weeks ago. But overall, I have not made a full-length video on it since the beginning of September, and I apologize for that. I've just been incredibly busy in my personal life, and I've tried to make up for it with Senate and House predictions, and you'll be getting my final House prediction most likely tomorrow. My Senate prediction, final one on Sunday, and then the presidential one will most likely be on Monday. And I'll fit in a governor prediction somewhere in between those 3 days, depending on how I'm doing. But, worst case scenario, I'll push something to Tuesday morning. But, overall, we're getting down to the final stretch here, the final chapter of this campaign, and it is close. It is very close by every stretch of the imagination. We've never had a presidential election where polls were this close. Now, the polls might be wrong. Usually it's more like the chances of an electoral college blowout for either candidate are actually higher than a split result. But overall, the data has been consistent in saying that most of these 7 battleground states are incredibly close. So, first of all, let's fill out the states that we know are not going to be competitive for either candidate, and I'm going to try my best not to talk too long on the likely states because that's usually what make these videos very, very, very long. So, we just got the usual suspects here for Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Not Nebraska's second, not even close. Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, most of the Deep South. And so Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have 181 safe electoral votes. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have about 106. I'm going to add in Nebraska's first, Kansas, and South Carolina, as well as, I guess, Alaska, for those likely states that are bordering on safe. Alaska, maybe not so much, but it is a Trump state that it voted for him by 10 points last time. And while it is moving left and there's a very competitive House race there, I don't really think Kamala Harris is going to do better than, say, losing it by 6 points. So I would actually not characterize this with Kansas, South Carolina, and Nebraska's first. But these two states in one district are very, very competitive, or very much on the verge of being safe. But they're safe by probability, but likely by margin. Nebraska's first is on the outskirts of the Omaha, metro area. Kansas, of course, you got the Kansas City suburbs and historically Republican areas that have moved away from Trump candidates in recent years. And then South Carolina, black turnout, it's probably going to be pretty high. South Carolina is not a state where I've been looking at early voting data as much, so I could be wrong here in terms of the margin, but overall, that is what I have for y'all right now. Then Colorado and New Mexico, two southwestern states that used to be very much battleground states, are no longer battleground states, going to definitely be in the likely Democratic column. I expect Colorado to be on the verge of safe. New Mexico, not quite as much, but still very much solid for the party. And then we're going to have, Harris win Minnesota, the home state of her running mate, Tim Walz. This state was somewhat competitive under Biden in the final stages of his campaign. It looked like Trump actually might have a chance in Minnesota. But since Harris moved to the top of the ticket and chose Walz as her running mate, it's become pretty clear this state is not very close. In fact, if we look at the polls in here, I haven't been even keeping track of Minnesota. Oh, that actually is kind of close. But Survey USA, Harris +8. I think it's this InBold research. I haven't even heard of this group. They have Harris up only by 3. But overall, these other polls, these YouGov polls, look pretty good for Harris. This is what I'd expect out of Minnesota. And then Real Clear Politics, let's look it up. Actually kind of close. But overall, the polling has not been super close, but it has been kind of close, but the results or the overall expectation is that Minnesota will be pretty going to be on the, similar to Biden's margin here in 2020. I agree with that. So that's where I'll put it here. Main at large, I think, is going to be pretty solid for Kamala Harris. She will lose the 2nd district. That's going to go to Donald Trump. This has been moving very much towards the white working class, and used to be a very Democratic district, and vote with the rest of the state, but it has since has since shifted Republican, although it does look like Jared Golden, the Democratic incumbent in the House race, in the House for this district, is going to win re-election. There was a scare a couple of weeks ago, but it looks like he's kind of rebounded. You'll see more about Golden in my final House prediction tomorrow. And then New Hampshire, the polling here has been kind of close, but overall, there hasn't been a lot of, attention on it like there was under Biden. 538 has it Harris +5. But then again, the polls were kind of wrong in New Hampshire in 2022. They overestimated Don Bolduc. But generally, New Hampshire's polls are pretty good. I believe the YouGov polls, Emerson, that's kind of close. University of Massachusetts and Lowell Center for Public Opinion, that's a pretty good, that's kind of a regional pollster. I was going to say local, but obviously New Hampshire's not Massachusetts. St. Anselm, Harris +5, I believe that. So overall, mediocre numbers for the vice president out of the state, but overall not nearly as bad as what Joe Biden was getting here. And so that's where I'd put it right now. We'll fill out these two Rust Belt states, Ohio and Montana, or Ohio and Montana. Well, I got that from the Senate prediction. Ohio and Iowa. These used to be very, bellwether. These used to be bellwether states. In fact, Ohio voted for the from 1960 to 2016. Or from 1964 to 2016, voted always for the winning presidential candidate. Not always the winner of the popular vote, but always the winner of the Electoral College. In 2020, that changed when it voted for Trump by a similar amount, or when it voted for Trump by 8 points over Biden. Harris has actually been kind of doing okay in Ohio, not as badly as I expected, and it kind of gives Sherrod Brown a decent chance of winning Trafalgar, which had J.D. Vance up by 10 in his Senate race that he only won by 6, has Trump up by 6. But overall, Bowling Green has done some polling in Ohio. They have Trump up by 7, but overall, it actually looks like it might be a little bit closer than it was in 2020, and that could really help Sherrod Brown, who actually, I think has... is in a very much a toss-up race. I, really think that you could pick either side to win, and I would not call you crazy. You'll see my final prediction for that on Sunday. And then we go to Nebraska 2nd. This one, we've had a lot, and I mean a lot of polling data done here. Both in the House race here, which does have a Republican incumbent, and also just in the district for the presidential race. This district was always very solid for Biden. Republicans tried to use the state legislature pass a law in the state legislature that made Nebraska use a winner-take-all system, because in a scenario where Harris wins, the Rust Belt but loses the rest of these Sun Belt states, that would put her at 269, and that would tie her with Trump at 269 votes in the Electoral College, and then the House would have to decide, and for a very complicated and not, a process I don't really need to explain, that would have given the election to Trump through some convoluted rules with how many votes each House, each state gets in the House of Representatives for president in, a tied scenario, or a scenario where no candidate wins a majority of the Electoral College votes. But overall, that failed. Because a Republican state senator who wants to run for Omaha mayor next year blocked it, or for mayor of Omaha next year blocked it. Either way, it makes sense. And so the polling here has been looking really good for Harris. It's been really looking good for Tony Vargas, the Democratic candidate, taking on the Republican congressman here, Don Bacon, who seems to be in a lot of trouble this year. And so that is where it stands right now in Nebraska's 2nd. I give Harris about a 7 to 8 point win. If these polls are right, she could win by around 10 points. I mean, we have gotten so many polls out of here. Harris +8, Harris +12. Overall, just, a blowout, and she's been at 50% consistently. So I'm very confident here in Democrats, both in the presidential race, and I think they're going to do pretty well in the House race here. Nebraska overall this year is actually very interesting with the Senate race as well. So I think Nebraska's gotten a lot of attention this cycle. And then we're going to also go on to our final likely Democratic state, which is Virginia. There's been headlines about Virginia because of the Supreme Court's decision to allow the state to continue like suspending people or purging people from the voter rolls, which was under the guise of Republicans wanting to keep non-citizens from voting, which isn't really happening. But in the process, they're actually cutting out some eligible voters, some American citizens who were previously on the voter rolls who now cannot vote. And the Supreme Court sided with Glenn Youngkin and the state legislature on that. Well, I don't know if it's the state legislature, but with Republicans and Glenn Youngkin on that. So overall, we've seen kind of a wash here in Virginia for Harris. Some polls show her winning pretty decisively. Others have it pretty close. University of Mary Washington, which is, I would say a pretty good pollster for the state, has her Harris up by 2. Christopher Newport University has her up by 11. WAPO has her up by 6. And Emerson has her up by 8. So overall, I'd say she's going to do a little bit worse than Joe Biden did in 2020. I don't know if she has that same suburban Virginia, Washington, Nova suburb appeal, but it's going to be still a decisive win for Harris. I'm not buying the Virginia hype. I didn't really buy it when Biden was the candidate. But at least the candidate was poor enough then where it was kind of plausible to see the state getting super close. Now I don't really see it. And then we're going to go down to Florida. We'll mark that as a likely Republican state. There was some talk about it earlier in the cycle being a close state, but it has really just not, materialized for Democrats, and I don't really think that's a surprise. They're on track to lose Miami-Dade County for the second cycle in a row. But overall, they're going to do better in Florida than they did in 2022. I believe most of the polls here, University of North Florida, Trump up by 10. Marist, Trump up by 4. That's a little concerning for him. But Emerson, Trump plus 8. Florida Atlantic University, Trump plus 9. I all think that those are valid polls, and I would be comfortable, with those margins. I would say Trump wins by around, 7 or 8. And I think he overperforms Rick Scott just a little bit, but we'll talk about that in my final Senate prediction. And then Texas, I'm going to move this up to likely Republican, just by the narrowest of margins. I think it's going to be very close to, sorry, I was out of breath there. It's going to be very close to Trump's win here over Biden in 2020. Polls have been showing a pretty big delta between Trump and, Ted Cruz. But we'll get into that more in the video. But that Senate race is looking like it could be very close. But New York Times / Siena has Trump up by 10. Emerson has him up by 7. Signal has him up by 8. University of Texas. So overall, this does not seem like the cycle where Democrats are going to flip Texas. It could still be under 5 points. Polls have underestimated Democrats in Texas before, but in the last couple of cycles, they've actually been pretty accurate or have overestimated Democrats. So I think overall Trump improves with Hispanic voters slightly in the Rio Grande Valley. He loses some ground in the suburbs, especially in the Austin metro area, but Harris is not going to do very well with turnout in Houston. And she'll probably lose a little bit in El Paso as well. So overall, it's a bit of a mixed bag for Democrats, but, when you compare it to a state like Kansas, it's a lot closer. Remember, likely is a very large, range for a margin, one of our margin categories. So that leaves us with the 7 battleground states that have been talked about for months and months and months, back when Joe Biden was the candidate, and in the 3 months that we've had Kamala Harris as the candidate. So Harris is at 226 electoral votes. Trump is at 219. None of these states are going to be lean. Actually, there is one that's going to be lean. I lied. That is going to be the state of Nevada, which I'm going to give to Donald Trump by a lean margin. Now, I don't think a lot of you are going to like this prediction, but here's my explanation. The early vote for Democrats in Nevada are usually building up a firewall by this point of support. they're usually building up, a firewall to withstand a strong Republican election day turnout. With Trump now starting to, and Republicans starting to encourage their base to, Trump's base to vote early, that has kind of, that lead for Democrats, that firewall is basically non-existent. But it's not just non-existent, they're down by 5 points 4 days out from Election Day. John Ralston has, said that these, who is, a very famous election predictor in Nevada, has said that these numbers look good for look terrible for Democrats, but they can win if they win independents by a hefty margin, which is possible. But if you look back at the exit polls for Catherine Cortez Masto's Senate race in 2022, that was an R+2, electorate. And independents definitely did give Cortez Masto the victory, but she only won them by 3 points. And I remember reading Ralston's Nevada Independent article, his edition for, I think yesterday, his update yesterday. I'm sorry, I'm like rambling. And he was saying that even if Democrats win independent voters, if both parties basically hold 90% of their bases, who stay loyal to them, and Harris wins independents by 10, she would be down by 12,000 votes. So she would still be losing the state, even if she's winning independents by 7 points more than Cortez Masto, who won in an environment where the presidential race, or who won in a, in an electorate where Trump and Biden would have been tied in the state in 2020. That's the electorate that came out. It was an R+2 electorate, very large independent group. It was a pretty even electorate. Now, I do expect the early voting and the mail-in ballots from Clark County to get better for Democrats, but right now they have like a 1-point lead in Clark. They need to be winning it by like 7 or 8 to be winning the state right now. So while I don't think that this is going to be the result we see we're not going to have Nevada called for days after Election Day. Nevada is probably going to be the last of these states to be called, unless it's like tremendously close in Georgia or North Carolina, which is very much possible. But I think we're generally going to have an idea of the Rust Belt by the time, and most of the Sun Belt by the time we get a call from Nevada. And I think that, at that point we'll probably already know who the election winner is, but Harris is really, she's done a lot to appeal to voters in Nevada. She's obviously taken, some ideas from Trump with her tax on tips, her pro-tax, she's supported getting rid of taxes on tips, which is very, is very popular with the working class voters here in Nevada. And overall, there's been, the polling's not been great for Trump either. Trafalgar, which had Adam Laxalt winning against Cortez Masto in 2022 by like 5, only has a tie here. Emerson has Harris up by 1. Rasmussen only has Trump up by 2. So this is still very much a state that's in play for Harris, but, we're talking about an election that if it was held today, and while I think Harris would definitely win independent voters, I think that that's pretty clear what's going to happen. I don't think she's going to win them by enough to win the state if the election was held right now. I think that she would lose it by 2 or 3 points. I expect this margin to narrow. I will base my final presidential prediction on whatever John Ralston says, because that man has been right about Nevada statewide elections, about every Nevada statewide election for the past like 15 years. So I trust him with, my life, basically. If he says Harris is going to win, I will pick Harris to win. If he says Trump is going to win, I will stay with Trump as the victor here. But overall, this is what I think right now based on the early voting data, and I've been trying to keep up with the state in particular because John Ralston is such an invaluable source here in the Silver State for voting data. So then we're going to go to Arizona. Arizona has been very close. I've been shocked how well Trump has been doing here. I thought that, Arizona, this could all be a mirage, to be fair. Like, Kari Lake was up by 3 points in the governor's race in 2022 and lost to Katie Hobbs, who barely did any campaigning, but, granted, was the former attorney general of the state. I don't think a lot of people give her enough credit for her candidate quality. But, Trafalgar, again, lackluster results for Trump. That's a sign. Data Orbital, which was a very, the most accurate pollster in the state in 2020, had Trump up by 8. Rasmussen had Trump up by 2. So it's a wash. CNN had Harris up by 1, but I think right now, if I had to pick it, if you look at the delta between Ruben Gallego's Senate race and the presidential race, if you're going to believe that Gallego is winning by just a little bit, you kind of have to pick Trump as the victor unless the polling, again, the polls are wrong, but you can't, use the polls to argue something one way and use them to argue, or ignore them when making another prediction in the same state. So right now, Arizona, despite it being a state that really loathes the MAGA brand, I think if the election was held right now, Harris has been very unpopular on the border issue. And I think if she picked Mark Kelly, she would be a pretty clear favorite in the state. I mean, she would be in the lean column. And she could still win it. Like, I would not be surprised if, on Monday I moved this into the Democratic column. But right now I am, more, bullish on Trump here than Harris. But again, definitely have that feeling of, voters in Arizona just hate Trump and his brand so much that they may just vote for Harris. And, so that's why I'm kind of anticipating moving this state back to the Democrats on election eve. But again, we'll have to wait and see. Right now, I'm going to go with Trump. Georgia's early voting has not been looking great for the Democrats. A lot of people have been trying to twist it that way, like the political chatter. But overall, like, for Democrats to really be competitive in Georgia, they need to be winning. Like, they need to be, getting out or have an electorate that's like 30 or 27 or 28% black. They have like a 26% right now, which is not awful, but it's not like, that's not a winning number for them. The white number, or the white share of the electorate, is like below 60% for the first time in decades, which is good for Harris, and I do think Harris is going to do better with white college-educated voters just because of the trends in the suburbs. But again, if she does not have a lot of black voters turning out here, that's really going to hurt her in Georgia, which has been one of the states that Trump has maintained a pretty strong advantage in. I do think it's going to be really close, but overall, the polls, Marist has it as a tie, but everything else here says Trump. Atlanta Journal-Constitution, says Trump by 4. CNN says Trump by 1. Overall, it's a very, very close state right now. I would not be surprised if Harris wins it by any stretch of the imagination. She has a unique appeal to the state, but I think that she, right now, is not the favorite. And in North Carolina, this one really could be, dependent on, there are a lot of factors to consider here. We have the Mark Robinson, factor with him possibly pulling Trump down as Josh Stein, prepares to win by what looks like, 14 to 15 points in the governor's race, according to the polls, although, it has gotten a little bit closer in the polls. It was like Stein plus 25 a couple weeks ago. Now it's Stein plus 15. But overall, like, this is North Carolina. This is a state where Democrats are typically losing, and they're winning it by double digits still. So, the fact that we're saying 2015 instead of 25 is crazy. Then we have the Hurricane Milton factor. We have the fact that Harris has a unique appeal to the state in the early voting numbers. I haven't really heard a lot about North Carolina, but overall, we have a lot of factors here. I'm going to give it to Trump. I could move this to Harris's column on election day. If the rural areas around Asheville really are depressed in turnout, because they are still suffering from Hurricane Milton, and I send my prayers to anyone who is, stuck there, and I applaud anyone who's gone down there to volunteer and help these people, after this natural disaster. But if Asheville, on one hand, Asheville's turnout is going to be decreased, and that's going to hurt Democrats, but it's also going to be, a lot of the rural areas are going to be displaced and maybe not as able to vote, or as in good of a place to vote, and so that's going to really make it difficult for Democrats, or for Republicans, to really get a strong turnout. And Republicans are worried about the state. There's been this talk about the new chair of the Freedom Caucus in the House, Andy Harris, who took over for Bob Good after he lost his primary, obviously. He's now supporting, this theory, or this idea that the state legislature, which is in North Carolina, is like 2/3 Republican, should just give should hand the state's electoral college votes to Trump pre-election day because of, Hurricane Milton has made stuff unpredictable, which tells me that, maybe the Republican, internal polls here are not looking good. We don't have a Senate race here, but we do have a governor's race, so it's not like Georgia where the presidential race is really the only big race here, but, it's overall, I think Harris has, Harris is to win it. She's the right kind of candidate to do it. I think she has this, energy that hasn't really been seen on the Democratic side since Barack Obama in 2008, but I'm going to stick with history here. History says Democrats, come close in North Carolina, but they don't win it, and that's what I think is going to happen, but we'll see what I say in a couple of days. So now we're down to the Rust Belt. If Trump wins any of these states, he's president. Like he and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance here are at 268 electoral votes. Harris is still at 226. We're going to go through each of these states right now, and all of these are really close. I think Michigan, we've seen it bounce back to Harris, and overall, I think Trump, this is the best, this state is looking good for Democrats on both the presidential and Senate level. I think that this is, going to be Harris's best state and Democrats' best state, out of these free and, the blue wall states in the Senate races. Lisa Slotkin's outrunning Harris by around 3 to 4 points. But Harris has really bounced back. Emerson showed her down, but then CNN, I think, had her up by like 5 here. Marist has her up by 3. Atlas Intel has her tied. Insider Advantage, that's a GOP poll. They only have Trump up by 1. Susquehanna has Harris up by 5. Quinnipiac has her up by 4, which, it's a leaning poll. Trafalgar only has her down by 2. And this poll, said like Tudor Dixon was going to win the governor's race in 2022 against Gretchen Whitmer, and they were wrong by like 12 points there. WAPO has her up. So overall, it's still a very close race. I think, the Israel-Palestine issue is really going to, hurt Harris in, in Oakland and the outskirts of Detroit. But overall, that, it's still going to be, there's only 2% is still a lot of people, but 2% of Michigan's electorate is Arab American, and while that's a lot, that can, make the race, very close and potentially be decisive, it's still, not a very, it's not as, influential, say, the black vote in Detroit. It's still, in Oakland and in Dearborn, Michigan, it's a strong, base of support, and some of those Arab American leaders have thrown their support behind Donald Trump. But I think I think we're going to see a shift towards Republicans, unlike with anything we've ever seen with Arab voters after the Afghanistan withdrawal, and the Biden administration supporting Israel's war and Israel during the war in Gaza. But overall, I think that this race, Democrats just still have a structural advantage in Michigan. The Republican Party of Michigan has not won a statewide race here since 2016, and they've gone bankrupt. They have terrible leadership. They can't keep a party leader. And so I think all of those factors lead me to believe that Harris is on track to win this state. Pennsylvania is just so exceptionally close. The early voting data, though, is looking good for Democrats. So Politico wrote this, put out this article the other day that I read, and basically the main idea was that Trump was lagging in the early vote with senior voters, and so he won this group by about 6 points in 2020, and Democrats are winning, about 58% of the vote. 58% of the senior votes so far in Pennsylvania in early voting. And keep in mind, this is in an environment where Trump and Republicans, where Republicans this cycle are, more of them are voting early than they were in 2020, because prior to this, Trump was saying that early voting was rigged, that it wasn't, a secure system, so people just waited till election day. And so that, obviously in 2020 produced more Republican results than some of the polls were saying. But overall, in this more even environment with the early voting, Democrats are still winning about 58% of seniors cast, and while that's probably going to narrow during while that's probably going to win or lose, my God, my brain. Well, that gap is probably going to narrow. If you look at this new Fox News poll of Pennsylvania, Trump is, losing senior voters or voters ages 65 and older to Harris by 5 points. He won them by 5 points last year. You know, it's or he won them by 6 points, I think, in 2020. Yeah, he said yes. He carried 53% of the senior vote in Pennsylvania when he lost the state. So, and this Fox News poll has him winning, which means that he's making up ground elsewhere. But also, if you look at his comments in Madison Square Garden, I haven't even mentioned this. I'm sure you've all heard the story by now about the comedian that he had up, that he and his team had vetted and put up on the stage. The conservative comedian, I can't remember his name, but he was saying that Puerto Rico was just like a dumpster fire or something like that. Pennsylvania is the swing state with the largest amount of Puerto Rican voters. So when Republicans say that the Muslim voters are not going to turn out for Kamala Harris, or they're going to even vote for Trump in Michigan, you have to also consider the Puerto Rican vote in Pennsylvania. And so while I think Harris is really struggling in this state compared to other polls, some of the polls show it to the right of Wisconsin, but that's typical of presidential polls in Pennsylvania. They usually show it as the closest of these Rust Belt states. I don't think it's going to be the closest, honestly, because I think it's usually the middle, the state in the middle. Michigan is the bluest on the bluest of the three. Wisconsin's the reddest. That's just always kind of how it's been. But overall, it's a wash. I think Trump is going to do better in Scranton and in some of the white working class areas, but Harris is going to hold her own in the Philadelphia suburbs. She's been doing well with having rallies in Allentown. I think she's going to boost the Democratic numbers in Pittsburgh, and I think they got to get Joe Biden. Well, I guess Joe Biden's not really been campaigning with Harris, but I think in this state in particular, in Pennsylvania, he could really help them, being a native son of Scranton. I think you get him up there in Lackawanna County, and that could really make the difference for her. But right now, I'm going to give the state very, very narrowly to Harris, and that puts her 260 electoral votes, which means that Wisconsin's going to decide this one. And I'm going to give it to Harris. I think that we've seen a very strong, in the last couple of cycles, we've seen a lot of resilience from the Wisconsin Democratic Party. We've seen them really, in 2022, they had a massive success with voter turnout in the city of Madison and Dane County. And the polls in Wisconsin have been looking pretty good for Harris. They weren't looking so great 3 weeks ago, but she has since retaken a lead in the state. And Marist has her up by 2. CNN showed her with a whopping 6-point lead. Now, this poll also had Tammy Baldwin underperforming her, which I don't love, because I think it's pretty clear that she's going to overperform she's going to underperform Baldwin. I think Senate Democrats, by and large, are going to outrun Harris's numbers in these battleground states. But overall, I mean, these Republican pollsters like this American Greatness has it as a tie. Atlas Intel has it as a tie. Trafalgar has it as a tie. Rasmussen reports, this is a poll from like 3 weeks ago, had Trump up by 2. Marquette does have Trump up, or Emerson does have Trump up by 1, but Marquette has Harris up by 1. So overall, it's a wash. USA Today does have Trump up by 1. So you could make the argument for either candidate here, but I think right now, Trump's going to do well in the Driftless area and a lot of the white working class areas. Harris, though, is going to do really well in Milwaukee and Dane County. I think she's really going to turn out the votes there. And that's going to help Tammy Baldwin in the Senate race, too. And I think that I think Harris is going to keep her losses to a minimum here. And she's going to win the state. I think that Tim Walz has really been campaigning in a lot of these battleground states, sometimes on his own, which sometimes, has made this, I think that he was a very strong choice for the Rust Belt. I know a lot of people say Josh Shapiro was too, but I think Tim Walz also, the fact that Minnesota borders Wisconsin, a lot of people brought that up as, one of the reasons why Harris has been doing so well in Wisconsin. But, I think overall it's just the state of the race right now in Wisconsin is very close, but Democratic leaning nonetheless. I know I'm kind of rambling. I think that's because we've been going on for 33 minutes, or 34 minutes actually. But this is my second to last prediction for the 2024 presidential election. I have Kamala Harris and Tim Walz winning 270 electoral votes and winning the election with the narrowest, by the narrowest margin possible, and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance at 268. Harris wins by holding on to the Rust Belt, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, while Trump does well in the Sun Belt, wins North Carolina, flips Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. But again, this is a week out. I could have a very different map by, this is not a week out. What am I saying? This is like 4 days out, half a week out. And, on Monday, I will make my final prediction here. I could very much see moving a state like Pennsylvania into the Trump column. I could also see moving a state like Arizona or Nevada into the Harris column. This map could look very different in just a couple of days, because I'm going to be, combing through the numbers and trying to figure out what's what and what, I think makes sense. I will definitely, try and give my most informed prediction possible. I'm sure I will get a state wrong in the end, but that's just bound to happen. I made mistakes in 2022, but it was a very, overall I had a very good election cycle, and I think I'm going to have another one again. But what do you guys think? What do you think about my prediction? Do you agree that Harris is going to win the Rust Belt, or that she's going to win the election at all, or do you think Trump's going to maybe do a little bit better than I'm expecting? Just let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. I'm really curious to hear from you guys. It's been great having you, sit through my videos again for another election cycle. It's really been a pleasure doing it. I feel bad not being as available as I was 2 years ago, but, life gets busy sometimes, so, you make the most of it, and I think that I've done the best of that I could, and, yeah. So thank you all for your support. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, turn on notifications, and tell me who you think is going to win the presidential election in just a couple of days. We probably won't have the results for, maybe a week or so, and then in the fight for Congress, that's probably the same. We're not going to have a clear result for maybe a week or two, maybe even 3 weeks. It's going to take a while to call all of these races, but it's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to watching the results come in on election night, and thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya.